Earlier this week marked 38 years since the Piper Alpha disaster. It remains the world's deadliest offshore oil and gas disaster, and the lessons learned that night continued to shape the way many of us work to this day. To mark the anniversary, I am re-releasing the episodes with both Joe Meanen and Ed Punchard, who were there that night. If you listened before, I hope you'll listen again, and if this is your first time hearing those stories, I hope you'll take something away from them. I know I certainly have. We remember the 167 men who lost their lives, and we remember the lessons that came at such a horrible cost. Welcome back to Wind, Waves and Wells with Joe, the podcast where we dig into the real stories of offshore life. Today, we're talking about one of the most harrowing events in the history of the industry, the Piper Alpha disaster. On the 6th of July 1988, a catastrophic series of explosions tore through the platform, leading to the loss of 167 lives. It was the worst offshore disaster the world has ever seen, and my guest today, Joe Meanen, was there. He lived through it, he saw the chaos, the heroism, and the sheer terror of that night firsthand. This isn't just history, it's a story of survival, loss, and lessons that should never be forgotten. Just a quick thank you to the supporters of the show today, Intervention Rentals, a company bridging the gap between the traditional energy services and a sustainable future. With provision, expertise and renewable innovation, whether it's wellhead services, flow management, iron management or measurements, they deliver cutting-edge solutions with safety, cost reduction and innovation at their core. Their commitment to sustainability extends beyond traditional energy, and with their division Sustainable Solutions, helping industries like agriculture, aquaculture and distilleries optimize processes while reducing environmental impact. If you're looking for a partner that puts efficiency, safety and the future first, check them out at interventionrentals.com, and a big thanks to them for supporting the show. Hi Joe, thanks so much for coming on. So obviously, in the introduction, I kind of introduced a little bit about, the story and where it stems from. Would you like to kind of tell it from the actual horse's mouth about where you started and who you are?
Okay, my name's Joe Meanan. I'm one of the 61 survivors from the Piper Alpha disaster back in July 6, 1988. Coming up for 37 years ago now, and actually out the 61 survivors that there was, I think we believe there's only 20 to 25 of us left now. And that's just a kind of guesstimate, but that's kind of what we've worked out.
Is that because quite a lot of them never really came back after it, so to speak, came back to the forefront once the incident happened?
Well, no, just over the years, Joe, it's been, people were obviously back then that survived were, around about my age or a bit younger, in their 40s, 50s, and just through natural progression of life, people have passed away through different illnesses, older age. There was actually two guys at the end of last month that passed away. I think one was about 76 and the other one was just over 80, 81 or 82. And yeah, just this, just really the cycle of life. And it's, just, as I say, it's 37 years ago. And, just people have, time has caught up with people.
Yeah.
Through one thing or another.
So obviously before Piper Alpha, what was your main journey into the offshore industry like? What were you doing? Where did you, obviously it wasn't your first trip or anything like that. You'd been offshore for a wee while prior to it. So how did you kind of start and what were you doing?
Well, I was brought up in East Kilbride, and then I went away and lived in Jersey for a couple of years. And in between that time, my mum and dad had moved up to Stonehaven. My dad was a steel erector by trade, and he was involved in, he actually went up to Sullenbow to work while I was over in Jersey, and then it was time to come back. and he told me I could get a job up there. You know, when they were building the oil terminal, the Solombo oil terminal, back in, I think it started about 77, maybe 78. I went there in 79 as a trainee scaffolder, and once the building of the oil terminal had finished, it was just a natural progression to go offshore from there, you know. So I first went offshore in 1982 and worked for a number of, I worked basically for one scaffolding company, but we'd been on a number of different rigs, you know, between the first platform I went on was the Dunlin Alpha, and then the Brent Delta were both Shell platforms. Then I went to the Ninian field, which was Chevron at that point. That was the three platforms on there. There was the Central, the Northern, and the Southern. And done a couple of trips on the BP40s, just on the Charlie platform. A couple of trips on a hookup on the Bray Alpha. That was Marathon at that point. And in 1988, March of 1988, I done my first trip on Piper, which was Occidental platform. So although it was only 6 years I had offshore, I'd actually, you know, had a bit of experience how the different oil companies managed health and safety offshore.
Mm.
Some were a bit more proactive than others, if you put it that way, you know,
Yeah.
and some weren't so good. And I've also said over my time, it's it sometimes just even depended the OIM and the safety officers that came on, you know, even crossing over between shifts, and you know, it just depended how what their attitude was to do with health and safety,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, because I can't imagine. I've worked with quite a lot of boys from that kind of era. It was a totally different era, really, in regards to what we get now, kind of thing. But what was that time like? Because ultimately, it was on the back of the '70s, which was boomtown. Everyone was, every man and his dog was kind of wanting to get offshore, and I heard it was mental. But what was the '80s like? Because ultimately, we were getting in the '80s. It'd been a well-established kind of industry by then. But what was that era like? What was it like on the platforms, and what was the kind of day-to-day life like in comparison to now? I imagine it'd be night and day.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Uh, Obviously, our accommodation was a lot different. Being contractors, we were kind of put to or our accommodation was kind of the lower end of the luxurious. We
Slum.
were in 4-man cabins. Yes, well, TLQs, temporary living accommodation, you know, and it was just converted
Yeah,
containers. Shared. Some of them were shared shower rooms and stuff like that. You know, not your own cabin with your TV and I'd imagine computer games. Maybe not so much now, but a few years ago, and you know, you get all your sports and your movies to hand and your accommodation nowadays. I would imagine, you know, maybe not so much in the older platform, but certainly on the more modern platforms.
yeah. I mean, that's one thing I do think about is because you go on these platforms now, which have been around for so long. I mean, they're rotten to the core. What were they like then, though? Were they still pretty? Were they still looked after well enough to kind of, or was it starting to fade away then? Do you think?
Yeah, because a number of that platforms had been, uh, you know, established for 10 to 15 years at that point.
Mm.
Especially the Brentfield and the Dunlin Alpha was one of the oldest platforms also, and I I got uh, when I say I done 2 trips on the BP40s, Charlie, and that was like night and day. That was going from like a 2-star hotel to a 5-star hotel, the accommodation and the just your general social facilities. You know, your TV rooms, your you know rec rooms where you get a game of pool or snooker, uh, ping pong, just different things. It was night and day, absolutely. Uh, Going back to going on paper, it was like stepping back a bit in time. Even on the platform, I was only 12 years old at that point.
Right.
It was just basically built to get as many people on as they could, and uh, you know, for what I've learned since also as well, it was all about just getting the oil,
Production.
producing the oil as quick as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and pretty much that's the way it was.
So prior to the incident, what was life like on the Piper? Because you went out in March, so
Yeah.
were you happy enough when you were on it?
Well, one of the things I do say, and I do my own presentations, Joe, as well, is you just got acclimatized to it. You just accepted it. I'd been working offshore, let's say, for 6 years at that point, and the other guys I'd worked with, some of them a bit more experienced, some of them less experienced. But yeah, we just kind of
It
just
is what it
sucked
is.
it up and
Yeah.
got on, yeah, and got on with it. I mean, our, it wasn't a too bad a life. I was single at the time, so I was quite happy my 2 weeks on, get that over and done with, and get back on shore and just try and enjoy myself as much as I could. So it suited my lifestyle, and yeah, we just accepted what we got,
Had there been
basically.
was there any concerns about the safety on the platform prior to July?
On paper, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd been on it was an Indian Central one time. I'd been working night shift, and I'd been on a small explosion in a it was a holding tank for, I kind of remember. I don't think it was gas. It must have been oil or some kind of fuel or something, and it was summertime, and the heat had built up, and there was gas, in the void between the oil reserve, I think, and and it blew the lid off the tank because the temperature had got too hot, and there had been other incidences, but mostly minor, but it just got you just really accustomed to accepting these things and just getting on with it, and you know, having to go at your muster point or whatever, and then you get stood down. So it was a matter of, you know, that's this is where we're working. This is part of our job. And just really looked at it that way, which I think, obviously, looking back on it, was uh, not the right attitude we should have had. We never appreciated, and I say this is one of my biggest regrets, that I never appreciated how volatile and dangerous uh, a platform was, where I was working, and I never appreciated it. One example, Joe, is whenever we were told we were going to a new platform, it was mostly platforms I worked on. Uh, You'd maybe the office, and you'd ask who else or who was working on that platform. You'd phone them up if they were at home,
Yeah.
just on your landline. And, if you'd worked with the guys before and you got into a conversation, but the two main questions was, what likes the food, what likes the accommodation, you know,
Yeah.
nothing about health and safety, nothing about, the history of the platform and uh, how it, if there's been any incidents happened over the previous years on a platform. It was just a whole different mindset back in those days. You just accepted it and got on with it.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like with the way you're speaking about it, it's almost normalized to have incidents, get yourself into a muster, wait for it to be sorted out, and then was it a case of, sort it out the next day and get production back and going again then? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Which is a big
yeah,
no-no nowadays, ultimately, because yeah. But it's the same old thing, isn't it? Unfortunately, and we'll come to it in a bit. Is it's hindsight, and you sometimes nowadays you learn from incidents. but it doesn't
Mhm.
sound like in the 80s they were learning from any incidents. They were just kind of normalizing it and moving on to the next thing, were they?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, there'd be maybe investigations done or whatever, to causes or whatever, but it was never really shared with us guys or anything. The contractors. I'd imagine it would have been, it would have been shared and investigated by the personnel of the whatever oil company it was. The production staff and such like, safety officers, OIMs. It was never really shared as far down as us, and we just basically get told, yeah, it's safe enough to go and work and,
Yeah, crack on.
get on with it. Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, so I mean, we'll go to it now, but take us back to July the 6th. How far through your trip were you, and what was that day like?
Okay, so I was 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. It was the 6th of July, was a Wednesday that year, and we had one more shift to work on the Thursday, and we'd be flying home on the Friday morning. So I was sharing a cabin with three other scaffolders. Two of the guys I was working with directly, and the other guy he was working in another squad. And yeah, we just got up. We are starting to get look forward to getting home, and uh, so in the morning of the 6th of July, we got up, went for breakfast. Uh, Guys I was working with, we seen that Caddyshack was on the movie that night, a comedy in the cinema, and we decided we'll go there after we finished work. We were working 15-hour shifts, Joe. It was a shutdown. It was on at the time, a kind of part shutdown of the platform. And yeah, as we seen the other scaffolders during the day, there was 15 scaffolders on at that point because it was very, very busy time. And we just said to them guys, let them know what we were doing that night. I think maybe 10 of us went to the cinema that night. Might have been 8 or 9. I can't not remember exactly. But it was a kind of just a normal day for us. It was just nothing too much out the ordinary was going on. We were extremely busy, let's say, working 15-hour shifts. And as it came to 9 o'clock in the evening, that was our finishing time. One of the guys working with me, because it was a four-man cabin, he got away just about 10 to 9 or something to get in and get a quick shower. And then he would go to the Bond, the shop on the platform, get some, whoever got away first always went to the Bond to get some cokes, Mars bars, whatever, iron brew and such like. And then other guy, Davey, he went away just about 5 to 9. And then myself, just about 9 o'clock, get in, got a quick 2 minute shower, changed into more comfortable clothes, your working clothes, along to the cinema. The guys in the cinema knew that that were showing the movie knew that there was people working till 9 o'clock that night. So the movie didn't really start till kind of between 5 past and 10 past.
Mm.
So we were in there. It was the cinema had been added about 2 years earlier, just kind of big converted container. But it was one of the more better social things on Piper, and it was a good sound, it was good screen to watch movies on, and we went there just as we normally would do. It was quite busy. It held about 40 or so personnel, and I'd say it's maybe at least 3 quarters full anyway, and we were just sitting in there watching the movie until about 45 minutes or so into the movie. You could hear excessive flaring going on outside. The southeast flare boom wasn't too far from the cinema, and it was loud enough it drowned out the sound of the movie. And then a silence fell over the cinema. There's a few curious looks between people. There was maybe 4 or 5 personnel from Occidental were in there also, and they had a few quizzing looks between each other. But then it subsided. Then it started. Then and then noise started getting up in the cinema again. The laughter and just enjoying the comedy. But within a minute, it started up again, but even more excessive. You could actually feel the energy coming through the floor, up through your seat in the cinema. Then all of a sudden, there was a huge explosion. The whole platform dropped back and forward. Part of the roof of the cinema fell in. The cinema fell into pitch blackness. The lighting had failed. There was initial panic in the cinema, people screaming to get out the cinema because there's actually only one real in and out entrance to the cinema, right up the back. But within maybe five to 10 seconds, the emergency lighting kicked in, and it was a matter of, right, lads, let's calm down here now. Let's get in an orderly fashion, get out the cinema, back into accommodation. You just had to go outside for maybe couple of meters or so to get back into the main accommodation. And we got in there, Joe, and unbeknown to us, and you see it in one of the slides I gave you, from the Tharos, the explosion, it totally destroyed the main control room of the platform, which was on the west side of the platform. Therefore, there was no alarms went off, and there was no alarms and no tannoys,
Right.
So nobody really knew what to do. My kind of first thought was to get to my lifeboat. My muster station was stationed at my lifeboat, and I'd got separated from the guys I was with in the cinema. But I say, no alarms, no tannoys, nothing to tell you what to do. As I got over to the west side of the platform, there was people coming back from the west side. They tried to get out the west side, out the door at the end of the walkway, the corridor way, and they were coming back saying, "No chance, you can't get out that way. Smoke's too intense. There's a fire out there." Same again. Tried to go over the east side. Tried to do that as well. Same again. People coming back saying, "No chance." And unbeknown, let's say nobody knew what was happening. You were, hands tied back behind your back or blind or whatever, you were just going by what other people were saying. And, it was a really strange situation, with people just going in different directions, some going up, some going down. It was just really, the best way to describe it was just, just like being in a maze or something like that, and you didn't know how to get out.
Was that mainly because there was literally no direction at the time? It was almost a free for all.
Yes, yeah, pretty much. Because, like I say, you get your lifeboat drill every week. The alarm goes off. Same as if you're in offices or whatever. You got your scheduled alarm drill, fire drill, and everybody goes out. Out to the car park, and you get to your muster station. And we'd done all that before, but there's no alarms going off. There's no information getting fed to people. It was just, nobody had experienced that, so it was just total, I wouldn't say confusion or panic, but it was certainly confusion, but not really panic at that time,
See,
and
see when you left the cinema at first, because you said you went outside briefly. At that, did anything did you see any fire or anything like that at that time?
no, not at that point. No, it was just a matter of getting from the cinema. I'd say it was maybe just a couple of meters or so back into the main accommodation.
And was it absolutely, because obviously platforms normally are roaring, but you're obviously in shutdown. Sorry, so it wouldn't have been as loud as usual. But was it loud at that time because of what was going on?
Mm-hmm. It wasn't any more than what I would have, been accustomed to. You know,
So at that time,
uh,
you guys really didn't actually have a clue what was going on at all, just that something was not right.
just you just knew there had been an explosion. Obviously, knew there was a fire. With the people coming back saying, that you can't get out that door, can't get out the west side of the platform. There's a smoke and fire out there. Over at the east side, it was just mostly smoke out there. But the first explosion, they only had firewalls dividing the modules, Joe. And the firewalls were even though the platform was only 12 years old, the firewalls were that degraded that if you pushed with your finger, you could have pushed a hole in the firewalls, and you didn't even have to push very hard. So in the initial explosion, which the release of the gas wasn't too much condensate gas. It was, the condensate pumps. But there must have been other pockets of gas in Module C that ignited also. The whole 11 days I'd been on the platform before that, you could smell gas throughout the platform, in different areas. And I say, we just kind of got on with
Accepted it, so to
and
speak, but accepted because you didn't know any better, did you really, ultimately?
well, but we probably did, but we just accepted what it was,
Yeah.
you know.
It was day to
And
day normal. No, it was your day to
yes,
day job, was it? And you didn't expect,
yeah,
you didn't know any better really at the time that was totally wrong, really.
I think we and that's how kind of what I say also myself is, that was one of my biggest regrets. And you couldn't speak up too much at that time either, or you would get NRB,
Yeah.
not required, and it happened to a number of people over the years on different platforms I'd been on, and you'd come back for your 2 weeks, and it's pretty much the same crews, and you'd be asking where's such and such this trip, and whether it was a pipe fit or a welder or electrician, rigger or whatever, they'd say, oh well, such and such Jimmy or Frank has been saying too much, and they're just,
Yeah.
they're not coming back, and if they were lucky enough for whatever company they worked for, they'd maybe get moved to some other platform or job, but if you did cause too much a stink, you'd get NRB'd, like I said. But yeah, just yeah. I mean, Piper had a pretty poor safety record over the years. It was a year or so before there was a couple of a rigger and a scaffolder get killed because they were working on a job that wasn't, didn't have a permit and such like, yeah, just
It's almost,
that's
yeah.
one of the.
It's obviously we'll go back to the story after, but it's almost like it was not so much destined for what it did, but it was destined for something had to happen on it for it to kind of ultimately like change its culture, though.
Well, I mean that's right, Joe. And see if the 80s was so much things going on in the 80s, and the first one I remember was the Bradford football stadium
Mm.
going up in fire. And then you had King's Cross, you had Clapham Junction, you had the Zeebrugge disaster, they had the Free Enterprise, uh, Lockerbie the year after, you had the Hillsborough disaster,
Mm.
and all they've all got a kind of a thread, there's things people aren't getting listened to. People are afraid to speak up. People are in jobs that they shouldn't maybe are not well enough qualified to do,
Mm.
and especially the speaking up culture. I know it's changed an awful lot nowadays, but back then, and that would be even true, I would imagine, with the guys who that work for the
Yeah.
operators on all these different platforms.
Yeah, just shut up and get on with it, so to speak.
Absolutely, to a certain extent, just depending on, what position they held and how well they were thought of or whatever, but certainly, and it even went right through to what I seen was in the Grenfell disaster as well, that people had been, the residents had been complaining for years to their housing authority and the local council as well,
Yeah.
The things they were complaining about things and they weren't getting listened to; they were getting ignored. So
it's still there to some extent, isn't it? Then, when you think about it in that way, there is. Hopefully, it's not as what it was like, back in the 80s, but it's still not 100% gone, is it? Really?
I wouldn't think so. And yeah, I mean, I've been in a number of the companies now, and they're trying to change certain things. I think the biggest thing is, to what I can pick up, is that the people that are working don't quite get it, as I did myself. That how quickly things could change, and escalate into a major incident. So it's still there to a certain extent. If it's ignorance or lack of knowledge, or just not knowing that they can do this.
So obviously, you've left the cinema now. There's total disarray on the platform. People haven't got a clue, what's going on. You can't go certain ways because people have come back and told you that there's too much smoke, or it's there's too much fire. Where's the next protocol? Where do you go to then?
Yeah, so this is maybe 5-6 minutes into the event happening after the first explosion. So I say I'd got separated for the guys I was with in the cinema, and just kind of wandering back and forward a bit aimlessly, just asking people what they were up to, and it seemed to be most of the people that were in that area were heading up to the galley area, and the galley was just below the helideck. So, and the galley was a designated safe area. It was fireproofed with a positive airflow, so it should be keeping the smoke out, So eventually I made my way up there, and just at the entrance to the galley was a reception area, and it had like a 3/4 size pool table there, snooker table there, and that's where you would either check in if you were coming back offshore, or you waited in that area till it was time for your chopper to arrive to take you back to the beach, So I got up there. There was double doors that took you into the galley. It's maybe 7 minutes or so past 10 o'clock now. And it was double doors that took you into the galley, Joe, swinging doors. And I opened the door on the left-hand side, had a look in. The emergency lighting was still on at this point. And I looked in, there was maybe about 80 men all in there. It was silence, pretty much nobody was speaking. And they were all either squatting on the floor, sitting on their bottom, leaning against the wall, or lying down, leaning on their elbows or whatever, just keeping as low as possible. And I didn't really know what to do at this point. I was just standing there, and all of a sudden the door on the right-hand side opened, and a guy burst into the galley and shouted, "Is there anybody here from Bodens?" And Bodens was the drilling crew on Piper at that time. Somebody recognised his voice and shouted, "Mark, we're over here. Get yourself over here." So that's what he done. At that point, well, I thought that was a good idea. I shouted, "Is there any scaffolders here?" Same again, the guys recognised my voice, the guys I was with earlier on. Shouted Joe, and they were actually round the back side of the galley. The galley if you could imagine, you went in, it was all seating area in front of you, and over to the right hand side was the kitchen area of the galley, and just at the end of that kitchen area to the east side of the platform, there was a little dry store area, and there was a back door to the galley with a landing area out the back, and that's where the catering staff would get their supplies delivered to, you know. So anyway, the guys I'd been with earlier on were all around there. As I started making my way around, there was two men standing up, and it was the OIM and another senior manager from the platform. I'm not sure if it was one of the safety officers or who it was, but somebody shouted out, "Colin, tell us what's going on." He is obviously a bit more forcefully than that. What we're going to do. And as I passed, he was just standing there, frozen to the spot. Like, you know, he was just looking straight ahead. He'd been overcome by the situation. The other senior person that was there shouted out there'd been a Mayday sent out, which there had been just at 10 o'clock from the radio room. And if you've heard it before, Mayday, Mayday, Piper Alpha on fire, explosion and fire, all personnel abandoning the platform. I mean, it was right that the Mayday was sent out, but it wasn't quite the case, all personnel abandoning the platform. But anyway, that was the message that was sent out. As I passed, and the other senior manager said there'd been a Mayday sent out, and there should be helicopters here within the next half an hour, 40 minutes to come and pick us up. And so just stay where you are, guys, you know. That was the message. So as I got through to this little dry store area at the back of the galley, same again, there was about 20 men sitting there, and they were all squatting down on the floor. They all had wet dish towels over their noses and mouths, you know, cloths. And it says, "Joe, you'll get a dish towel up at the sink." And there's big industrial sinks, you know, for washing up all the dishes and such like. And I grabbed, there's a big pile of dry dish towels. I just grabbed one of them. I just turned on the tap as you would normally. And as I turned on the tap, there was only dribbles of water coming out. And I don't know if this was a defensive thing for myself or just not realising the situation we were in. But once I turned on the tap, there was only dribbles of water coming out. It's starting to sink into me now. There's no power, there's no water, there'll be nothing to fight this fire with. We're really in a bad situation now, you know. So anyway, there's still water left at the bottom of the sink, so I soaked the dish towel in there. Went back down and sat with the guys. Says, "Has anybody got any information? Have anybody heard anything? What's going on?" They said there'd been two of the firefighting team had come up to the back door of the galley with their breathing apparatus on and their PPE, and they were going to go and see if they could find any escape routes. But they were never coming back. As we were sitting there, the smoke was starting to get more intense. You could hear like these yawning, groaning noises. And without us realising it, it was actually the structure of the platform starting to be compromised, you know, with the heat from the fire. So it's starting to melt and buckle. Therefore, there was windows breaking, you know, glass and windows breaking. So it was obviously letting more smoke into the galley area. Emergency lighting had failed by this point, so it was only really the light from the flares that was, giving us light, and they were quite intense. And says, "Well, if we stay here and anything else happens, we'll not be in a position to do anything for ourselves. Why don't we go out and climb up on the heli deck, which was just a level above us, and we can see what's happening, you know, because if we stay in here and anything else happens, we'll not be in a position to do anything for ourselves." So after maybe 10, 15 seconds of, you know, just chatting about that, says, "Yeah, right, okay, that's what we'll do." Right. So as we got up to leave, and it was mostly scaffolders that was there, but there was 6 guys who were working for a communication company, and they had been upgrading the communications on Piper and the satellite dishes and such like. So we'd done work for them, getting them access to wherever they, you know, were working. And they made no signs of moving. I was one of the last to leave. And I says, "Are you guys not coming with us?" And they looked at each other and says, no, we've been told to stay, so we're just going to stay. So, okay, good luck to you. And we left, climbed up onto the heli deck. First time and got outside, that thick black smoke, it just came apparent straight away. Says, well, there's no chance of any helicopters even coming near this platform, never mind trying to land on the platform, Could imagine the panic that there would have been if we did manage to land a chopper on the platform. Anyway, we came along. One of the guys says, right, let's get up on top of the radio room, which was just at the heli deck there, a white container. And it was the radio room and the heli deck landing office, that shared that office. So we got up on there. That was the highest point we could get to that area of the platform. And that thick black smoke was coming across in layers. Every so often there would be a gap, in the smoke. Like, if you're on the beach, the best way I describe it is if you're on the beach and you see the waves coming in, and you get. So, and we'd all stand up and grab a breath of fresh air. Also, the Tharos it was off the west side of the platform. It was connected to Piper during the day, but it pulled off at night time because there was divers in the water from Piper Alpha.
Oh.
It was mainly there. The Tharos was mainly there for accommodation support, but also had firefighting capabilities, and it had an 8-bed medical facilities on it also. But I had moved a bit closer, and it had a water cannon right at the top of one of the crane jibs, and it had been the only water cannon that had been trained on Piper up until that point, and it actually caught us up on top of the radio room. The Tharos came in for a lot of heavy criticism at the public inquiry. I do believe that little bit of getting our hair and our clothes soaked did save us from being more badly injured, as I might come on to a little bit later. But then one of the guys says, well, go over to the west side of the platform. Like 2 heli decks. The main heli deck and emergency heli deck, it was known as, which was the west side of the platform. Maybe it could move a bit closer, lay the crane jib down on the emergency heli deck. We could climb onto that. It was just like desperate situation and just desperate ideas. So anyway, we got over to the west side of the platform, waving down at the Tharos. I'm sure they could see us. It was about 12 or 14 of us. And then all of a sudden, that's when the riser from the Tartan fractured, and that huge fireball engulfed the platform. Everybody just jumped back and piled on top of each other. You didn't actually know what had happened. You just knew there was something horrendous had happened. As people got up, they just took off in all different directions. There wasn't another word spoken between us all. It was panic, really. Just people got up. As I got up, and just seeing everybody just scattered in all different directions.
Sorry, Joe, how many of you were up there at this time?
It was about 12 or 14 of us.
Right.
Yeah, Joe.
And how many of them were scaffolders that you'd worked with before?
Yeah, I think it was pretty much all scaffolders. Yeah, I think so. But might have been maybe 1 or 2 other people, but not that I can recall. Right. But I know that the majority of them was people I knew. Yeah, and let's say then they just scattered in all different directions. Myself, I run across this radio mast, climbed onto the radio mast, started climbing up the radio mast, absolutely going nowhere, just come to a dead end. But as I was climbing up, the heat was getting more intense. I could feel it, and then I just slipped. I had trainers on, tracksuit bottoms. I slipped, and I just thought to myself at that point, I said, well, that's it, I'm dead here. But it was just at that point, it was like somebody just flicking a switch. Whether it was a higher being looking after me or just a will to survive. But I came down the ladder, down to the level below the heli deck, run along the access stairs that would take you up onto the heli deck if you were leaving or arriving on the platform. Run over to the north side of the platform, had a look over. That huge explosion had cleared all the thick black smoke away, so you could actually see down to the sea. I had a life jacket on at this point, took the life jacket off, threw it in front of me, I knew I could use the safety, the safety net and the supports for the safety netting to try and propel myself away from the platform. And I knew exactly what I was doing, but it was like an outer body experience, as if somebody else was making you do what I was doing. It's quite difficult to
No, I
explain.
can imagine.
It was clear as day, but it wasn't it wasn't me thinking logically or whatever, maybe just as well. But then, so I took a run and knew I could use the supports to try and propel myself away from the platform, because I knew there was overhanging things below. And it was only once I'd done that, as if I came back to myself. And the first thought came into my head was, what the fuck have I done? It is. And it is. And it's very much like a cartoon, and you see the coyote for Roadrunner or whatever, running off the end of a cliff, and they realise what's happened, but then not another thought came into my head till I hit the water, which kind of took about 6 seconds to cover that distance. It was 175 feet from the heli deck to the sea, and then bang! I knew I hit the water. Don't know how far I went down. Obviously, a bit disorientated. But the light from the fire above gave me a reference to get back to the surface. Got back to the surface, huge gulp of breath in, had a look around, and just maybe a metre or so away from me on my left-hand side was a life jacket floating in the water. I could only imagine it was the life jacket I threw in front of me. Grabbed a hold of that, and all the lifeboats were stationed at the north end of the platform, Joe, and that was beside the accommodation. And at least one of them had been blown off in the second explosion, and part of the roof of one of them was floating in the water next to me, or a couple of metres away maybe. Grabbed a hold of that, wedged my arm in, and that gave me, not just for buoyancy to keep me afloat. And the way, it was a beautiful summer's night that night, you often get offshore in the summer, and sometimes in the winter time, almost flat calm. But the sea was running from south to north that night. Well, just not even a half a metre swell. So that was in my favour, taking me away from the platform also. Got so far away from the platform, could see the rest of this shell of this lifeboat floating in the water. Disregarded the stuff I had, swam over to that, climbed up into the lifeboat, and I was looking back at the platform, trying to take in what I was witnessing. And I thought to myself, if there's anybody left on that platform, they're gone. But there was actually people who'd got off the platform after I had, It was pretty amazing. But anyway, everything was happening so quickly. I could hear a fast rescue craft in the water. It was coming towards the lifeboat. As I was sitting on the rim of the lifeboat, I looked down, because I had a polo shirt on and tracksuit bottoms and that, and I looked down, and I had these huge blisters on my hands and arms, and I couldn't figure out how that had happened. Anyway, so like I say, things were happening so quickly. This fast rescue craft came across the lifeboat, asked me if there was anybody else in the lifeboat, got me into the fast rescue craft, and that's kind of when my injuries started taking effect on me. They lay me along the side of the fast rescue craft. That's when my adrenaline had, reduced, stopped pumping so much, and that's when I say my injuries. So from then on, for about the next 40 minutes or so, I was in and out of consciousness. I do remember them vaguely manoeuvring me into a stretcher to take me through the fast rescue craft back onto the supply boat. And then a bit later on, from the supply boat, they just craned the stretcher straight onto the Tharos. And by that time, there'd been medical people arrived out from Aberdeen or some of the other platforms. I do remember at that point I was going into shock. And somebody says, or one of the medical staff says, he needs a shot of morphine. And I remember just getting that in the left cheek of my bum. I could feel it spreading across my body, and then bits and pieces. And then the next thing, I was on a chopper back to Aberdeen to the hospital. And yeah.
I mean, obviously, you jumped quite a significant distance as well, did you? It was about, was it? I think I read someone that it was 175 feet that you jumped
Yeah,
from the heli deck into the water. Which,
yeah,
when I think about it now, there's so many times you're up at heights and you look at it and you look over the side. And I have been up at, I couldn't tell you exactly, but that's a significant height to jump.
hmm
Um, and to do that, I mean, considering that you're drilled in, you're supposed to go to your lifeboats. A lot of people tell you don't jump into the North Sea because it is the North Sea at the end of the day. But I guess you were literally at that point. It was either that or you stay on, and you might not be here to tell the story to this day, though.
yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And the barns, the barns, did you had no recollection of them until you eventually realized. Oh, I'd imagine you by then you would have realized you were safe once you were in the FRC.
Yes. So what happened there, Joe, was once I'd been in hospital, I had four uh, operations under general anaesthetic in the hospital, and then another 3 afterwards, for the skin grafts and that, But one day, the surgeons came along my bedside, maybe after being 3 or 4 weeks in hospital, and says, right, Joe, let's try and work out where you would have received your burns, because they explained there was no charring of my skin around, so I wouldn't have been in any direct contact with flames, So, I mean, they didn't know the story, but I took them through the story like I've just told you, and they says, well, it's happened during the fall, just that 6 seconds or so, and I've been jumping off the platform. My arms have been flaring behind me, with a short-sleeved polo shirt on, and it's just been heat radiation. The temperatures were that high on the platform that it was heat radiation. It caused the blisters. Therefore, when I was in the lifeboat, looking down and looking at them, and it's just happened between that time, between jumping off the platform, hitting the sea, and then that 5-10 minutes afterwards, whatever it was, it would have been about 10 minutes, I'd imagine, between I got back to the surface, got onto got to the lifeboat, and then looked down and seen these huge blisters on my hands and arms. And I also mentioned to them when we were on top of that radio room that we got soaked with that water cannon from the Tharos, and it soaked our clothes and hair. And I honestly, I did have hair back then as well. And do you think that saved us from being more badly burnt instead of our clothes just being dry? And they said, yeah, 100%, that saved you. Got a couple of little marks on my back and shoulders where possibly my clothes would have been dry,
Yeah.
And they weren't bad enough to get skin grafts, but that you can see quite clearly their burn marks, and they said, yeah, pretty sure that would have saved you from being more badly burnt, So the temperatures, steel starts to melt, compromise it at 1350 degrees centigrade, So the temperatures have been up to thousands of degrees centigrade on the platform.
And that's what I was going to say is you said you looked back up one more time and before you got rescued, and I take it was just a big ball of fire, was it?
Yes,
It
absolutely.
was
Yeah,
just
just
unbearable.
huge. Yeah, the thing I can equate it to the most is, and I know that I've ever been close to a volcano blowing up, but just for what you see on the TV, it was just like a volcano blowing, and yeah, and I thought, wow, but there was that, I thought if there's people still left on there, they're gone, but there was actually some people still in the core of the platform. And if you watched any of the documentaries, that a crane jib fell down and it gave them a bridge to get over. But some of the guys were shouting because when they were running across part of the pipe deck, it was that hot. The plastic, their boots were starting to melt. Their feet. It was that extreme. The boots or whatever they were wearing on their feet were just starting to go on fire.
And so the recovery side of things, I mean, you're brought back to Aberdeen, ARI, I'd imagine, and then obviously, you're in hospital for a wee while after that.
Yeah. So it was about 6 weeks or so in hospital, 4 operations. Myself and a guy called Roy Carey were 2 of the more badly burnt survivors. And Roy, back then, as like I am now, never had any hair on the top of his head. And he got off more to the southern end of the platform for a lower level. And the way the sea was running, it kind of dragged him under the platform. And the way he described it is that if you remember, he used to get the old gas grills on a cooker and that, and he says it felt like that. And he says the temperatures were that extreme, he thought his head was going to explode. And he was putting his hands up to cover his head, and his hands were getting all burnt. So he kept diving down into the water. And he says in the documentary Fire in the Night, he thought, an easier way to die would be by drowning. But his natural instincts kept bringing him back to the surface. That maybe after about the 4th time, he was far enough away from the platform that the heat wasn't too intense. And Roy got all the skin on the top of his head. They actually just cut all the skin off the top of his head and right down to his skull. And but then over the next week or so, the medical staff would come in and inject fluid into the skin that was left on either side of his head until it looked like something out of a Star Wars movie or something, and took him away one day and just cut the skin and folded it over, and covered the bit that was missing. It was pretty amazing, even though it was nearly 37 years ago. So yeah. So
I'm gonna bring up the you did send us some slides earlier, and I'm gonna bring up, because obviously there's one in there of yourself. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Should come up soon. Probably be
exactly with the 3 of us.
Yeah. So I'll go through the slideshow now, kind of thing, just so as we're on it. So there it is. And like you say, I don't know if you can see my mouse on it, but this is where you're talking about, isn't it? When you came to jumping off.
Yeah. So that's the radio room there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the heli deck nearest is the emergency heli deck, the main heli deck there, and just that's the north end of the platform. Southern end is where the 2 flare booms are. Down below there, the first module was Module A, was the drilling module. Then you had Module B, there was the oil recovery module. Module C was the drilling recovery module. And Module D was where the utilities were housed, diesel generators. And the pumps for the deluge system were housed in there also. And just that kind of yellow container type looking thing with a door there, that was the main control room, just left of the crane pedestal, Joe. Yeah. And that was the main control room of the platform. And the explosion was in Module C, and there, so the main control room was totally destroyed in the first explosion there. When Piper first went on location, it was only producing oil. Only all the gases were getting flared off.
Right. Okay.
Joe.
Yeah.
In 1980, a gas recovery module was installed on Piper to process, the gas and save flaring it all off.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it was legislation that was brought in by the government back then, actually.
And then there's just, but I was one of the questions I have for you, because I've been on the 40s myself, and I've been on the Brents and the Brays. How big was the Piper in comparison to, let's say, the Brents, for example?
It wasn't as big as the Brents.
Right.
Yeah. I would say it would have been similar sizes to the 40s field. I was only ever on the 40s Charlie, but it would have been similar size to that, I would imagine. But it was producing much more oil and gas than any of that platforms ever were,
Right.
ever were. You know, it had 250,000 barrels a day average, and yeah, and then it was either, when was it, mid 80s or something. It hit a world record at the time of 317,000
I did
barrels
read
in
this.
the one day.
Yeah, I did read about
Yeah,
that, like,
yeah,
which is an
yeah.
astronomical amount when you
Oh,
consider to today's production in the North Sea. I mean, it's probably nearly a quarter of what they're producing in the North Sea today, and they were producing that a day off one
yes,
platform.
that's right. Yeah, huge amounts, absolutely crazy, and all had oil and gas pipelines from the Tartan, the Claymore, and then it had a gas pipeline between Piper and the MCPO1, to transfer the
Right.
gas
Yeah.
from the other platforms. Yeah.
And then obviously, this will be seen if you can watch on the YouTube. But this is the picture you were on about earlier. That's the Tharos. Is that right?
Yes, that's
And then
correct. Yeah.
obviously that's the Piper, which you can't actually see because of the size of the fireball.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I don't think you need much of an explanation of that, really, do you? Consider I take it the Thanos, was that smaller? That would have been smaller than the Piper, was it?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It was like I say, mainly for accommodation, Joe. But it was a dive support vessel, a firefighting vessel. Actually, supposed to be one of the most up-to-date firefighting vessels anywhere in the world. And like I say, it had an 8-bed medical facilities on it also. So it was a multi-discipline platform.
Do you think?
Semi, I should say, son.
Sorry,
Semi.
do you think the death count would have been far more if it hadn't have been there though?
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. There was a couple of things, Joe. One of the things I believe would have helped an awful lot would have been if we'd have. First of all, the deluge system wasn't fit for purpose. It had been. Lloyd's of London had come out and done an audit on it in 1986, and it was condemned. It wasn't fit for purpose. But Occidental appealed that result or that finding, and they got a 2-year exemption. Also, the deluge system was put on manual that night because the OIM from Piper believed while there was divers in the water from Piper, the deluge pumps should be set to manual, not automatic. Okay, so but even if it was automatic and the deluge pumps did, kick in and start, the system was that degraded that it wouldn't have made that much difference at the end of the day. But if you had a fully functioning deluge system, I believe that would have helped an awful lot because it would have suppressed at first a lot of that black smoke. It would have kept things a lot cooler for a lot longer, so the riser from the tartan wouldn't have degraded so quickly, melted so quickly. Possibly would have, gave people a more of a chance to survive. Unfortunately, let's say there was no real leadership on the platform that night. And I can't blame the guys in the OIM too much for that because they were never given the information they should have been by Occidental, their senior managers on shore. Best thing that could have happened or would for the men that are on Piper would have been to get as low as possible, as quickly as possible, and get into the sea because there was a lot of traffic in the sea. You had You had the Tharos, you had your standby vessels, Silver Pit. There was two supply boats. There was a trencher there, the Lowland Cavalier as well. So there was a lot of traffic, sea traffic in the water. So although like you said earlier on, you're always told never to get into the water. That would have been the better option. And I only found this out last year, Joe, reading a book, or somebody showed me this book, and there was about 60 men working that night, on night shift and such like, and the drilling crew. And there was 19 divers just ready to start work. First diver was all suited up to go into the water at 10 o'clock. Out of about 60 or so men that worked that night, 67% of them survived, and there was only 13% of the men that were off shift that survived.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So if you'd been outside and seen what the situation was, you were able to gauge it and realise how bad the situation was and get,
do something. You could react a lot quicker ultimately, could you? Because when you're off shift,
yes.
you're totally off. And most boys will just switch off, and I'm one of them as well. You park your work until the next day. But I guess
That's right.
if they're in the thick of it, they know straight away that something's not right. And I guess I can understand now actually. But the only thing I would have thought that there would have been more chances of them get is because of the size of the explosion, that would have just engulfed more people at the time. But I guess it's one of them where I guess like you say, they're in the thick of it. They know straight away what to do, and they would have just jumped straight away because they would have seen that there was no coming back from it. And I'd imagine fight or flight would have really taken instinct quicker on them than it would have for the likes of yourself, who was switching off, who'd just been on a 15-hour shift trying to wind down and trying to get yourself set for your last shift.
No, that's right. And yeah, I've heard different people speaking about different things over the years, and most of the men that never made it were in the galley area. 81 or so bodies were recovered, and the 6 guys who had says to them, asked them if they were coming with us, and they said no, we've been told to stay, we're just going to stay. Their bodies were recovered, so staying in there, he had absolutely no chance. Out of that 12 or 14 of us that went up out onto the heli deck, there was only 3 of us that survived out of that group. But if we'd stayed where we were, none of us would have survived. And their post-mortems, after, when their bodies were recovered, they all died of smoke inhalation. So, overcome by smoke starts to affect your decisions you make, and you just overcome, and you just fall asleep.
So,
unconscious.
Of the 3 of you that made it, I take it all of you obviously jumped. What happened to the other boys? Did you ever find out where they went?
Yeah, no, some of them, a lot of them jumped also as well, but they either, if they'd hit something on the way down or hit debris in the water, their post-mortems, a few of them were, they had broken limbs, broken pelvises, but ultimately the cause of death was drowning,
Yeah. And I think there's another thing that we've not touched on as well, is that this fire has been constantly fueled by other platforms as well, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. So the Claymore, which was a twin sister of Piper, almost exactly the same, was in full production till 11:30 that night, because the OIM on Claymore didn't believe that he had the authority to shut down that platform. He had to wait to get permission from his manager on shore. Yeah, that photograph there, Joe, that's from the Tharos.
Right.
Looking back, and I say it was connected during the day with a gangway bridge, but it pulled off at night time because the divers were in the water from Piper, and you can see there, how intense this is. 2 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 minutes after the initial explosion, and you can see how it sent debris, the initial explosion sent debris through into module B and A, fracturing crude oil pipes in there, which led to that oil-based fire, that thick black acrid smoke.
So this picture's quite soon after the initial explosion then, this one. And it
Yes.
almost looks
Yes.
like daytime when you look at that photo,
Yes.
doesn't it? I mean,
That's
yeah.
right.
And it just shows you the ferocity of what was going on there.
Mm-hmm. So that's like I say, maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 minutes maximum, after the initial explosion, and how intense it's, it is already.
And then you're trying to get off. I mean, I just put my mouse out. If I'm right, you can tell us I'm right and wrong. But you're trying to get off around about here. That's where the heli deck would be? Is that right?
Yeah, just up a little bit further, maybe. Yeah, and just to the north of that. Yeah,
and that's what you're trying to get out of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. If you watch this on the YouTube, you'll see that you can't see any. There's no chance you're seeing anything, is there?
No, that's right. But what I said is that second explosion, when the riser from the Tartan fractured, that huge explosion cleared all that thick black smoke away for
Right.
for I don't know how long it was. But it obviously something that magnitude just took up all the oxygen or whatever in the air, and it just cleared all that thick black smoke away for that, that amount of time.
Yeah, and then this one here, Joe. What's I mean, how far after was this?
Well, that's the next morning.
Jesus.
So I usually put that, the first one you showed, and then that one, and no, this is Piper Alpha on the 6th of July. This is all that's left the next morning. It took about 6 hours for that, for the whole platform really to disintegrate and fall into the sea. And one of the worst, or one of the things that happened, Joe, was a lot of that guys that got off quite early and they got picked up and they got taken to the Tharos, and they obviously they were in the water and they weren't badly injured. They got changed into dry clothes and that, just overalls, basically overalls they got given, and a lot of them went back and leant on the handrail of the Tharos and watched the rest of the disaster unfold. And they wish they'd never done that because it's haunted them through their lives, and a lot of them suffered really quite badly with post-traumatic stress disorder.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
And I mean, then this is you.
That's me. Yeah. That was some photographer managed to sneak into the hospital, and that was me on the front page of the Daily Mail, I believe it was. And yeah, and when I do my presentations or whatever, I say, well, hopefully it's the one and only time I'm ever on the front page of a national newspaper, because it's obviously something major, serious, or horrible that's happened that you're on the front page, a national newspaper.
And obviously because it was a national disaster, Maggie came up as well, didn't she?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think there was, in my opinion, well, in quite a few our survivors' opinion was that they were obviously negligible in the disaster. They had no union recognition offshore. The health and safety was under the guidance of the authority of the Department of Energy, who obviously had a conflict of interest, because the government were bringing in huge amounts of tax revenue from, the oil that was getting produced, oil and gas that was getting produced. And they only had 9 inspectors for the whole of the southern, central, and northern North Sea. And back then it was about 200 installations between your semi-submersibles, your drill ships, your jackups, and your platforms.
And there was 9 people overseeing this.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
I think it tells the story in itself, though, doesn't it?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're aware, Joe, that the government put £1 million into a disaster fund, and so did Occidental, for some of the the people who are hard up, the bereaved families and such like, because obviously they lost their income from mainly their husbands or their their fathers, that were working on the platform, and it was all men. It was on the platform then, and I've never ever heard of a government putting £1 million into a disaster fund.
Which kind of shows, like you say, the guilt in some extent of what happened. Really, does it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can dig deep into it. I mean, her and Thatcher, and I mean, it was big. There was strikes. There was people. It was at the end of the 70s. They tried to early 80s. They tried to strike for union recognition offshore. Having sit-ins in the platforms and that, and that was pretty quickly quashed and that,
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, I mean, she was dead against any kind of union stuff, because it wasn't that long before that they'd shut down all the coal mines and such like, and they had the big battles with the coal miners and such like, So yeah, and the guy who was in charge of Occidental back then was a guy called Dr. Armand Hammer, and him and Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and all that, George Bush Senior. They were all big oil barons, They were all pretty pally with each
Hmm.
other, like.
So, yeah, well, it leads us on to the next question. Actually, life after Piper Alpha. Um, how did you obviously
Mm-hmm.
you were in hospital for a good few weeks after the incident, and both mentally and physically, how did you recover from it, or how did you deal with it?
Yeah, no, that's right. So I live in Stonehaven, so it's not too far from Aberdeen, and then yeah, I got out of hospital after about 6 weeks or so. But I still had quite a lot of follow up appointments and physiotherapy and ongoing things after that. So I was back and forward to the hospital quite a bit for the next couple of months, and all in all, it took me about 2 years or so to fully recover. I would kind of say, John, I was fortunate enough not to be too badly affected by post traumatic stress disorder. But certainly it caught up with me in the first Christmas of '88. In coming along to Christmas time, and I just thought everything was fine. I was just actually so happy to be alive. It was unbelievable. I'd a lot of you know euphoria, It was just, I just thought, wow, it's amazing, how I survived this. But it did catch up with me in the morning of Christmas Day in 1988, and I'd switched on my TV. I'd been out the night before, and then I was just overcome with grief. I just sat in I was in my own flat, and let's say, I was overcome with grief, and I just cried for, it seemed like, for ages, and quite hysterically as well. Just like sobbing, and no sobbing, crying out loud, and you know, and all I could think about was this be the first time, all these people that had lost their loved ones, and mums and dads, and the brothers and sisters, and the wives and partners, but most of all the children, that would be suffering, it'd be their first Christmas without their dads, So I was just overcome with that,
I think mentally, it kind of hit you that day.
Yes, oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, it did. Yeah, just overcome with grief, and that was my first. Wow, yeah, I was. was taken aback a bit with that, like, you know. But I also did say to myself, and I says, well, I can't go on like this, you know. I says, I kind of, you kind of, you know, let this beat you again, you know, or you just become another victim. And I just kind of looked at myself in the mirror and says, well, my attitude would be thinking if I hadn't made it and some of my fellow workers I was with that night had I made it, I would have wanted them to grab this second chance at life, you know, and go on and, you know, make the best of it, you know. And that's how I kind of justified it to myself.
So
And
yeah, sorry, I've cut you off there. I was going to
that's
say,
all right.
but you never went offshore again?
No, I never.
No.
No, I think there was about five guys went way back offshore again over the years. I think most of them are all finished now.
Yeah.
Just retirement age and such like.
And what was it mainly? I take it was just the thought of kind of going back to it just never dawned on you to go back again then.
Not really. I kind of thought I was in a dead end job back then. Scaffolding offshore, you know, there was no great prospects. Things have changed obviously since then. I mean, earlier that year, Joe, we there was a change of the maintenance contractor, like a new company coming in and taking over the maintenance contract. But we were told our jobs were all safe, you know, on paper. All we had to do was change the colour of our overalls. But we had to take a pay cut from $5.20 an hour to $4.90 an hour. And even no, it doesn't seem very much at all nowadays. But back then, if you were working 15 hours over a 2 week period, it worked out between £65 and £67, which back then would have paid a fair bit of my mortgage. But it was the effect it had on morale on paper. You know, it was really quite significant. But it wasn't just on paper that was happening. It was happening all over the North Sea. There'd been a big downturn. The oil price about 3 years before was about $30 $31 or so, and it had dropped down to less than $10. And there was so much cutbacks going on in the North Sea. You know, it was just probably all over the world, but what we experienced, like I say, and it wasn't just on paper that was happening. It was happening all over the North Sea, and it was all just the easiest way, or one of the easiest ways for oil companies, to save money was to cut their cost of their personnel.
So what did you do after Piper Alpha? Because obviously, like you say, you probably couldn't just sit around and dwell on it. What did you go on to do then? Because I know obviously now you do a lot of speaking for companies with regards to the safety of the offshore, well, of all industries and stuff. So what kind of led you into doing that?
Well, what led me into doing that was it's just what I'd done, Joe. Afterwards, Piper, I'd done a bit of travelling once I was fit enough and everything, and been through all my medical stuff, and I'd had family in Australia and I'd family in Southern Africa as well, in Zimbabwe, and I left Aberdeen and remember that being 1991, the end of 1991, and went to Australia for 4 months and then went to Africa for a couple of months, and it was great. And without realising it at the time, it was actually a great thing to get away out of Aberdeen, in this area. It just gave me a whole different perspective, and that was great. When I did come back, some friends of mine, they'd bought a hotel in Stonehaven, and I just started working in the bar. Then it was a bit time to start not getting back to work, so that was about 93, and it was just something to do. And then eventually, it was a family business, and they had a bit of a bust up between the families, and I took over part of the business. How I went 50% in the business, and that was great. We'd done that for a few years, and then that finished, and then I ended up just having a pub in Stonehaven myself for about 7 years or so, and then I sold that, and then I thought I could retire then, but I was really getting bored. I wasn't. It was about 54, 55 then or something, and I just thought, oh, no. So I actually ended up just doing a driving job with a local taxi company, doing school runs and that,
Yeah.
And I kept doing that, and then I met this guy a guy from Glasgow who'd been involved in a bad accident himself. He fell off the back of a building in Paisley, and he was telling us that he went around doing these talks about what happened to him, safety awareness and safety, just basically how easily things can go wrong. He actually fell. What was it? 38 feet or so. He fell onto cobbled streets in Paisley, and he was more badly injured than I was, because he kind of almost landed head first. He managed to get his arms out in front of him to break his fall a bit, and but he was really badly injured, as you can imagine. But yeah, he's set up a PowerPoint presentation for us, and obviously I was nervous as hell the first few times I'd done it, but it's kind of growing, and yeah, it's been quite amazing how it's grown arms and legs. And last year I'd been in a number of different countries, places, just share my experience.
Yeah, I tell you, it's definitely a testament to the kind of individual you are, though, as well, Joe, to come out and be able to do it. I mean, obviously being in it. I mean, the size of the disaster is absolutely ginormous, and a lot of the industry, changes stem because of the incident. But how do you honor the 167 men that lost their lives that night? Do you think?
Well, yeah, it's down as the world's worst offshore platform disaster, and if I can do my bit to make sure that that's the way it stays. This is Piper is the world's worst offshore oil disaster, and we don't have anything, any kind of fatality offshore or any kind of fatality at work is, something that hopefully can be avoided, but things do happen. But for that 167 men, if I can make, or my story and my presentation can help make sure that Piper stays that way as the world's worst offshore oil platform disaster, then hopefully that'll that'll be my bit done.
Yeah, and this is a question. It's going to be difficult for me to ask because ultimately, different people come on the show. But I'm going to ask it anyway, and you can tell me to piss off if not. But it's something I ask everyone. But if you look back on everything now, if you had your time again and you knew what you do now, would you have gone down the same path of what you did?
What do you mean during the
Just
disaster?
everything, offshore, the general. I mean, obviously, it's a difficult question to ask because obviously what happened to you.
No, that's right. No, no, that's fair enough, Joe. You're right, and I've kind of been asked this question before, and I've thought about it myself before. But you can't change things that have happened. Obviously, it would have been better, and you wish it had never happened, and all that people had never lost a life. But it's just a fact of life, and I've said this in presentations as well. It's happened, and it's how you cope with it. and deal with, these situations moving forward. And if lessons aren't learned, and the same thing happens again, and Deepwater Horizon was a huge thing, the whole platform, the whole semi-submersible got destroyed and went to the bottom of the sea, and 11 people were killed on that, which was bad enough. But yeah, there's going to be things that will happen, and I say the Grenfell Tower disaster affected me. It not affected me, but a lot of the stories that came from Grenfell, how people had complained about the alarms and only one stairwell at one escape route and stuff like that. People were advised to stay in their accommodation. They would get rescued by the emergency services. People went against that advice. Some of them made it, some of them never, and it was all really relevant to my own situation. We were advised to stay where we were, and I just thought, God, that's the same. That's lessons. That's the same mistakes that were made. From many years ago. How does stuff like that still happen? That's just, and that kind of gets me. So I've just got to say, Joe, that it happened. I was fortunate enough to come through it, and I don't agree or go along with that. Situation if you could change anything, because it has happened, and you have to deal with it.
Yeah, it's probably the best way you could have answered it, in all honesty, Joe. I don't think I could have thought of a better way to answer that. But one thing I will say from what I take this, like I say, I'm in this industry, so it's the impact has potentially saved hundreds of other incidents from happening. I mean, as bad as it was, the outpour from the Cullen inquiry and step change in safety and all the other things that have kind of come from it. I think it shows that okay, it took 167 men to unfortunately lose their lives, but how many more people have potentially been saved off the back of an incident that basically changed the whole outlay of the oil and gas industry.
100%, absolutely 100%. There was reports that had been done for Occidental themselves, the senior management, and you can pick this up and just right at the end of a step change in safety video called Remember Piper, and there was about 4 reports done for Occidental and loss prevention. Chemical engineer done an assessment on the platform, and Lord Collins says, he reads these not the reports out, but when the reports were done and everything, and he says in these reports could go to describe exactly what happened on the night. So Occidental had all that information right from, I think it was about 85 or so, and they never acted on any of these reports that were done for themselves. And they never shared them with their own personnel on the platform either. And that's how I can't be too critical of the management on the platform, the OIM and the assistant OIM and the safety officers, because they weren't given, the information that they should have been given. And one of the other big things that gets me is that nobody was ever held accountable for what happened in Piper, legally.
Because they were chased, they were left the North Sea after that, didn't they? Occidental, they that was it. It was which I can totally appreciate. It must have been incredibly difficult for them to kind of, would you say, get away with it? But in the most respectful manner, would, like you say, no one was ever held accountable for the fact that, and money is never going to bring back the incident and the damage that's happened to those people.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. No, they had a strategy worked out that they would just get everybody compensated, the bereaved families and the survivors, sell up their assets in the North Sea and get out of there as quick as they could, And yeah, but that's just the way it was. I'm not going to dwell on it too much
No,
because it can get you very
I can
angry.
imagine.
But yes, but yeah, that's how I've kind of dealt with it, Joe, and that's how I'll move forward with my life.
Yeah, and well, I mean, first things first is thanks so much for coming on and telling your story. I can imagine it's helped thousands of people. This has been brilliant for me. Just someone who obviously hears a lot about it, and takes a lot from it. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast, Joe.
No, that's right. No, that's what it's there for, And that I say I go and do these talks and that, and I do get paid for it as well, Joe. You know what I mean? I would never want to ever just think people think I do get paid, and I've been play. I was over in Dubai last year, Doha, States, and that as well. But yeah, it's the feedback I get, is quite amazing, and it's quite fulfilling actually. To think, well, hope I've made a bit of difference. To these people and their organisations. And that's quite humbling and that as well.
Yeah, no, I can imagine you've probably done a great deal for a lot of people in that regard.
Okay. No, thanks very much. Thanks for saying that. I do appreciate that.
No, thank you for coming on again, Joe.
That's all right. It's all right.
Right. Take care.
It's hard to find the words to wrap up a conversation like that. Piper Alpha wasn't just a disaster, it was a wake-up call that came at a devastating cost. And for those that were there, like Joe, the memories will never fade. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Joe for sharing his experiences. These stories matter. They remind us of why safety isn't just a box to tick. It's about people's lives. If you listen to this and taken something from it, don't let it stop here. Talk about it, learn from it, and never ever take safety for granted. Thank you for joining me on Wind, Waves and Wells. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time where we go again.